Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by publisher Adam Jacoby and managing editor Ross Binder here on this Wednesday afternoon. Before we get started, make sure that you smash that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking ahead of this Iowa versus Michigan State game in East Lansing on Saturday. What are your final score predictions? Of course, we'll give ours at the end of today's pod, but before we talk too much about the game ahead, a couple other housekeeping things we got to talk about. Not housekeeping at all. Just stuff going on around the Iowa football program over the weekend and early this week. Cam Herron, 2025 offensive line commit. He decommitted. He actually flipped to Notre Dame after an official visit to South Bend over the weekend. As your recruiting analyst, premium subscribers knew all about this. They were tuned in to the fact that he was on the official and that the flip was incoming. Of course, we were in contact with our folks at Notre Dame about the whole thing and regional analyst Greg Smith. So it was to be expected, more or less, for us. And it officially took place earlier this week for Cam Herron, who flipped to Notre Dame. Ross, I know you do a lot of editing for the recruiting content, so I'm going to go to you here first. Just thoughts on, and then of course we'll finish with me just because I am on the recruiting stuff. But just your thoughts when this started to come about, and once we got the news.
I mean, probably disappointment, but not a lot of surprise. I think you mentioned that Notre Dame was a school you've been hoping for or was very interested in. So the fact that he would flip to them is not surprising given that history, and the fact that it's Notre Dame versus Iowa. That's a significant difference for some, and so, but it's a bummer because he was by some people have him as a four-star recruit after he flipped to Notre Dame. But he's still, a highly regarded recruit. Really looked like he would be a good fit in Iowa's offensive line schemes, and you could definitely see him, becoming a fixture on that line, maybe sooner rather than later, because there's going to be a lot of there's going to be opportunities for playing time there after a lot of guys are going to graduate after this season. So there will be some fresh blood on that line, and he will not be one of them now. So. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Adam, what did you take away?
If there's any positive here, and these are relative because I don't think anybody on the Iowa staff was looking forward to seeing Heron go, but if there is one positive, I know that the staff had been looking at Heron certainly on the interior of that offensive line as a potential landing spot, and they've also got Joey Van Wetsinga in the recruiting class as well, and he's a guy that also projects to center. So at the very least, this is sort of a situation where they can, sort of look at this as, well, all right, that there isn't as much of a void left by Heron's decommitment, as opposed to a situation where if he was the guy in the middle on that offensive line for this entire class. So, at the very least, there is that. But yeah, Heron was a guy that we had sort of flagged as a really exciting prospect and a guy that fit really well in Iowa's scheme. So, regardless of who else they've got committed to the class already, this is a hit that Iowa is going to take, and it's especially for a program that specializes in doing this to MAC schools. I'm sure there's folks in Toledo and in DeKalb, et cetera, who are not shedding any tears for Iowa, but in terms of the people keeping track of this class, yeah, Cam Herron seems like the sort of guy whose name that we're going to be hearing for a few years to come, and unfortunately, it's going to be in South Bend instead of Iowa City.
So the things that stuck out to me about Cam as a prospect were explosion. He's just really strong despite his size, and he's a guy that had that type of frame that can grow into a really solid center guard one of the two. We had initially thought he was going to play guard, and then his head coach told us that Iowa wanted him as a center, and we were confused as to what the outlook was for the offensive line. And more often than not, what Iowa likes to do is bring kids in and figure it out. And that's really what it looked like with him and Van Wetzinga. But Joey is just kind of the prototypical center, and we've talked about that. I think that's the mold. I think that's the fit for him when he comes to Iowa City, and now that's just more clear. And like you said, Ross, we were told that Notre Dame was his dream school, and some folks around him really weren't sure about that initial commitment he made to Iowa, and then here we are in the season. He takes the official visit and he flips. And, to a degree, can you blame him? I mean, like, they just had a top 5 NFL pick in Joe Alt, who was a left tackle. I think he plays right tackle for the Chargers now because of Rashawn Slater, but he might have played right tackle at Notre Dame too. I don't know. He was a tackle either way. But I mean, for that reason, it makes sense. Like I said, dream school, closer to home. It's not a situation. Well, for all we know, Notre Dame has more money than Iowa does to give to recruits. So lots of different factors. I'm still a big fan of Cam Herron. I'm excited to see how things pan out for him. We are neither for nor against schools landing recruits at any point in time. I'm just for kids having success as a recruiting analyst more than anything. But yeah, Cam's a good kid, and sometimes this stuff just happens, guys. Like, I know people like to give high school kids hell when they decommit, commit, flip, all that kind of stuff. But this is just one of those situations where sometimes it happens.
Yeah, and if it comes to pass that he can't really crack that depth chart at Notre Dame, he's not really feeling South Bend as a long-term fit. This is still the transfer portal era of the NCAA, and presuming that he didn't burn his bridges on his, way out of Iowa's commitment class. And it really doesn't sound like he did. Iowa finds itself sort of, ahead of everybody else when it comes to, if he wants to get out of Notre Dame. And if he doesn't, then great. Like, he has, made a correct decision about his long-term future. But yeah, these sort of relationships don't end at a decommit anymore in the modern NCAA. And, for a lot of reasons, it's sort of better that way.
So we will have all the intel as we can regarding the 2025 class and how things look on the offensive line going forward. If they're wanting to go and get another guy, if they think they're going to go portal, we will keep you updated as far as that goes on iowa.rivals.com. For our premium subscribers, if you're not a premium subscriber yet, you can do that today, iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. That's always in the description of the podcast. So if you want to join us, just scroll on down, hit that link, and get signed up today. Super easy, super quick. But in staying in recruiting, and then we'll bounce over to the game this weekend. Alante Dean did take his official visit over the weekend. I might have mentioned that on our pod that Adam and I did on Saturday, but from Florida, former teammate with Rashad Godfrey. We got intel on that on iowa.rivals.com for our premium subscribers. If you want to check that out, I'm still working on getting in contact with him to see how the thing went. But we also just got an update from our regional analyst, John Garcia, that covers Florida. Really good stuff from him on Dean's recruitment, and we will keep you apprised as that goes forward. Plus, we've got men's basketball recruiting nuggets. Another official visitor coming to campus this coming weekend, and a couple other guys that him included, that they're doing well with. So we will keep you posted on that. And of course, going to have a lot of intel on that. And I just dropped another nugget this afternoon for folks on Iowa men's basketball recruiting. So tons of stuff to check out there. We'd love to have you join us at Hawkeye Beacon. Now, shameless plug over. Let's move on to Michigan State. Iowa taking on the Spartans in East Lansing. I will be there this weekend. Very excited for that. Going to be a quick trip, but always love getting on the road and covering games. Spartans are 3-3, 1-2 in conference, and they have lost 3 in a row. Boston College, Ohio State, Oregon, and they're coming off a bye week. Their only win over a Power 4 opponent this year, Maryland, 27-24. So Michigan State, I would say they're about where we thought they'd be at this point in the season. You guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Go ahead, Russ.
I would say that's a pretty tough way to start the Big Ten schedule. I mean, the Maryland game notwithstanding, but getting Ohio State and Oregon back to back essentially is a pretty rough way to go about getting started in the Big Ten. And so yeah, not exactly a surprise they would drop those games. BC's solid, so another not surprising loss. So I think they're about what anybody would have projected for their record at this point in the season.
Yeah, it really does sort of look like the bowl train has come and left for Michigan State, even though they're sitting at 3-3. Technically they're on pace to finish with 6 wins, but they only have 3 games against non-ranked opponents left, and one of them's Iowa. They get the Hawkeyes this Saturday, and then it's at Michigan, then it's against Indiana, then it's at Illinois. And the way that Michigan State is set up, this is not really a go up against most teams in the Big Ten sort of roster. There's a lot of rebuilding. Aiden Childs at QB really still growing into that role, and you can see that in the numbers he's put up. Just 5 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, but his talent is undeniable at the same time. So it doesn't surprise me that the line on this is only 5.5 points. It doesn't surprise me that people are expecting a close game. But in terms of where Michigan State is strong and where Iowa is strong, it really does look like Iowa can really start to sort of shut the door on Sparty's postseason plans with this game there in East Lansing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the schedule ahead, and it's looking like they could lose like 7 in a row. You got Boston College, number 3, Ohio State, number 6, Oregon, Iowa, who's probably going to could be ranked after this week anyway, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois. That's 7 losses in a row, and they very well could lose to probably Rutgers. I don't know what Purdue is. That Illinois game was weird, and they were awful before that. So who knows? And they didn't even have Hudson Card against Illinois. So, yeah, this is an like an odd, difficult schedule for them. They lost at Boston College. They barely beat Florida Atlantic week 1. I don't know if you guys looked at that at their schedule. They won 16-10. So this team is very much in the middle of a rebuild. Jonathan Smith, a good coach, but like there's only so much you can do. What they have like 40 transfers in the
Yeah, it was a very, very portal heavy offseason for them just to build out their roster with all that weirdness that happened over the last few seasons. Like it was a chore almost for them to build out their roster. I will say this about their portal efforts, though. Jordan Turner at linebacker, who they got out of Wisconsin, has been a revelation for them on the defensive end. And so, in terms of Iowa's scouting report for that Sparty defense, it starts with Turner. He's productive, he's tough, he makes smart reads. And against this Iowa offense, a guy that can sort of pick up on this and use that football IQ to, sniff out, holes or late developing plays. That's going to be really tough. And that's going to be something that Iowa needs to, or he's going to be somebody that Iowa needs to account for on basically every possession that he's out there.
Yeah, just to illustrate that point of the amount of transfers they had. So we at Hawkeye Beacon this offseason wrote an individual article for every transfer that Iowa got or was potentially going to get. And they just had one article that was labeled transfer tracker and had all the names on it. And they just updated it as they went. I'm sure they wrote some individual articles throughout the process too, but I know they did have that. I saw that on their site at one point this offseason. But probably the most notable transfer that they got other than Jordan Turner, you said, Adam? Yeah, the transfer. Where did he come from?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Yeah, you said that. Okay. Most notable transfer other than that, obviously their quarterback, Aiden Childs. You have to look at the greater picture, but in seeing what he's done so far this season in flashes, you can see it. And we saw it at Oregon State last year too. Under Jonathan Smith. He followed Jonathan Smith to Michigan State. I really like Childs right now. I think Kirk would refer to him like he referred to Dayton Howard after the game where he scored a touchdown against Washington. he's a really great prospect, right? He's on your team, but he's a really great prospect, which is just an interesting way to phrase that because we refer to recruits as prospects. But there's the potential there. He's a dual threat quarterback. Like he was a 4-star coming out of college, and Iowa would absolutely kill to have a guy like this. But he's on a roster with a ton of other transfers on on a team that's really working its way back, that's in the middle of a rebuild. But he's still pretty good. I mean, but he's also thrown in 8 interceptions, right? Like it's give and take right now with Childs. And again, he's showing flashes.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the possibility there with him. You know, he's a little undercooked right now, but give him some more time in the oven, and he can really develop into potentially, you know, one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. But you know, Iowa doesn't have to worry about that. They got to worry about the Childs they're going to see on Saturday, and that one is, like you said, Eliot, one that's been a bit error prone this season. He's got 8 interceptions so far. Michigan State as a team has 14 turnovers. They have been very loose with the ball, which could be a very good thing for an Iowa defense. It's, you know, a little more turnover happy this season than they were last year. So you're
He's
gonna
only
add something there, Eliot?
I was gonna say he's only thrown 5 touchdowns too. Like
Right.
five touchdowns to 8 interceptions is not good.
That's not a great ratio.
No, not ideal. And
uh,
you know, we talked, or I just mentioned about Iowa would love to have a quarterback like this, but this is a quarterback that I don't know that Kirk Ferentz would play right now, no matter the circumstances.
Well, there is also sort of the fact that he's running the Michigan State offense and not the Iowa offense, and so you know you just look at their completions. You know, he has completed 86 passes, which is the exact same as Cade McNamara, but he's thrown for several hundred more yards in those 86 completions. So a lot of what Michigan State's trying to do is push that ball downfield more often, and if it results in more turnovers, clearly they're okay with that. You know, clearly that's part of sort of the give and take. And, you know, for a team that, you know, their bowl odds were long coming into the season, and they're probably not going to come to fruition this year. Some of this is just a, learn on the field sort of situation. You already know that you are not, if you're Aiden Childs, you already know that you are not the reason that this team is or isn't going to a bowl game. You know, this is your opportunity to really start to understand how quick a not only a major conference secondary is, but a Big Ten secondary. You know, you're going up against guys that are going to the NFL pretty much every time that you are taking the field every Saturday. It's sort of the same on the line. Even if you're playing a bad Big Ten team, you're probably going up against a guy who's going to be playing on Sundays, or at least they're going to have that on their offensive line. They're going to have one guy like that on their offensive line. They're going to have one guy, maybe more, on their defensive line. That's just the way the Big Ten plays. And certainly in the secondary, at the same time, a lot of these teams, most of these teams, have some Sunday talent that you're going to be going against. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that you just sort of throw away any hope of succeeding, right? You want to be, at the very least learning how to play winning football. But clearly it's the way that Michigan State wants to play involves pushing that ball downfield, involves, use your legs, make a play, try to extend it, see what that secondary can do, see what you can do. And does it involve more turnovers? Yeah, of course, but also involves more yardage too. And just because Kirk Ferentz, skews much more to the, completable passes, take care of the ball side, it probably a little bit different over there in East Lansing.
And, you mentioned the passing yards thing, and that's kind of a risk rewards thing that, I think it's kind of the only chance Michigan State, not the only chance, but the best chance they have in this game, which is that the Iowa defense, the pass defense has been, I would say, not quite as stout as people were maybe expecting before the season began, especially in terms of, they've allowed a lot more big plays, some real chunk plays this season. So, Sparty's best offensive game plan probably is to try and hit a few of those chunk plays in this game, and see if they can do that, and hope that they hit more of those probably than he throws interceptions or does something damaging. Is that a winning gamble? I would say probably not, but I think that is a realistic gamble for them, and probably where they're going to kind of aim their offensive game plan, because they're not a very good running team, and Iowa's run defense is pretty solid anyway. So I think they're probably just going to have to, like you said, try and push it downfield and see what happens.
Yeah, you live with arm punts if nothing else, right? You know, that shows up as a turnover where a punt might not, but if you are not, especially with Michigan State's personnel and their, you know, relative unfamiliarity with each other, you're not going to dink and dunk this Iowa defense with that Sparty offense down the field and win the game. You got to try. You got to take those shots. You got to hope that they work out. And if they don't, well, you know, it's better than not trying, at least from their perspective.
You just got to be okay with some of the things, some of the mistakes that Childs is going to make. And that's this season really for Sparty. And like in this game, it's a microcosm of the season, but with a player who has that type of arm talent that Aiden Childs has and the mobility, you just kind of you take what you can get. So yeah, I mean, this is something that we've talked about recurringly, or at least the Iowa fan base, Iowa media has talked about recurringly in the way that Iowa plays defenses. They've tended to struggle with some mobile quarterbacks. Like how does Iowa try to combat that, Ross? Or how have you seen Iowa be successful in the past that you might apply this weekend against Michigan State?
Yeah, I know in the past they've, put a lot more responsibility on, the defensive ends to, make sure that that edge is protected and the quarterback's not able to escape around the edge. And then also it comes down to, strong linebacker play too. That's going to be, and from that standpoint, Iowa's in a better position than, probably anybody in the NCAA or the Big Ten at least. Having Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson there as guys that you can rely on to, hey, scout this guy, watch this guy, make sure he doesn't break off a 20-yard run or something.
And especially, I was just going to say, especially now with the new dime package, they're in a really good spot to take on a team like this, because Zach Lutmer can match the speed, he can match the athleticism, and you don't have to worry because Kyler Fisher, the way they have started to rotate now with Lutmer in there instead of more of a 4-3, they're running that dime. It's just a lot more efficient, and you can trust it a lot more against teams like Michigan State.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, and what helps Phil Parker immensely is Childs can't look across that line at Iowa's defense and figure out who, if anybody, is going to be spying him, right? Because like you said, if they're in that dime package, they can use Lutmer there. They can use Cohen Entringer there. They can use X there. They can use Castro there. They can even use Kyler Fisher as the guy who is, sort of spying Childs in some situations, because they've trusted him in those pass, heavy situations. They've trusted him to play in space before. So there's a lot of options. There's a lot of ways to keep this young QB guessing. And as long as Iowa doesn't allow itself to be predictable enough for a freshman, a redshirt freshman QB, a second year QB to, sort of make those reads, make those plays, and really, get into a comfort zone, into a rhythm, as long as they're able to avoid that, this should be a pretty easy job for the defense, because again, this is not really a situation where they're working with years of experience with each other. They don't have that, the years of rapport between quarterback and receiver. So this is a situation where Iowa should be trying to press Michigan State into mistakes and trying to generate another big play day like they had against Washington. Obviously, they're capable of another big play day, and this is, I think Phil Parker is licking his chops at the opportunities that he's going to have to call some aggressive plays, especially if special teams is giving Sparty some long fields like Washington had to deal with.
And that dime package, you didn't even mention John Nestor, right? Like they're just
him too. Yeah.
It's the rich get richer, right? Like it just seems like year after year they've got and that's just something they look towards in recruiting, right? Is versatility. I mean, we were talking to Zach Lutmer and Adam, you edited the article that I got up on Lutmer, and they're preparing him to play cash, strong safety, and free. And now he's playing essentially will linebacker in this 4-1-6, this dime package. So just a bunch of dudes who can play that role, play it well. And it's just a situation where if Michigan State had the level of talent they currently do, and it was a year in the future or something like that, right? They had a year of that coaching under Jonathan Smith, then it'd be a little bit more of a concern because you have that level of chemistry that, well, they don't have right now. So that's just simply an advantage toward Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when it really comes down to how you're going to succeed in a Phil Parker defense, so much of it is just knowing your cues. Like if A, then B, if B, then C, and so as long as they keep recruiting these kids who, have the acuity, the wherewithal to make those reads, make them on their feet in real time, make good decisions, which, easy for me to say, well, I'm, sitting here in my rear end with a ring light. It's so much more difficult to actually put that into practice, especially when you're on that field and making these decisions in, snap real time and then using your athleticism on top of that. Like it's incredibly difficult, but it's doable. And yeah, Lutner has started to really display himself, really worked his way onto the field. And, like we said, just how he has approached it in the different ways that I was using him, it's going to be really hard to get him off the field now because he's in that rotation and he has, we've used that term, you earn the trust in drops and you lose in buckets. He's been earning that trust in some pretty big drops.
Yeah, he has. And that's why wrote the article about him yesterday. Really, really fun article to write. If you want to check it out, it's at Hawkeye Beacon. Zach was great, and of course Kirk was happy to heap some praise on him as well.
Eliot, you didn't mention the title I gave the article. I can't believe you didn't mention you forgot it somehow. What was the title of the article?
And I did forget, so you're gonna have to tell me.
That's luckily my memory, which is a steel trap, as we all know, a Zach of all trades, and I was happy about that one.
I know you were. If you're making Ross do this, then you know it's bad. So 3 things we're watching for. Each of us picked one thing we're watching for ahead of this game. As the Hawkeyes take on the Spartans at 6:30 Central Time on NBC. Is it on Peacock as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, with that said, we talked a little bit about quarterback play. Ross, I'm going to start with you and your key, the thing that you're watching for ahead of this game.
Yeah, I thought about going with Caleb Johnson as the thing to watch, but that's just kind of obvious because he is, the axis around which the Iowa offense rotates this year. Although I do want to plug the article I wrote today about Caleb's 2024 season and how it compares to Sean Green's 2008 season. Pretty well, actually, through the first 6 games of the year. He is actually ahead of Sean Green's pace. So TBD where things go, but you can check that out on HawkeyeBeacon.com. But yeah, I would say I'm really interested, if I can talk, to see how Cade McNamara does this weekend because a few reasons. We got to see some real growth from Cade in the passing game against Washington, which, it's really been fits and starts this season. See some good, see some real bad again. Can we see a more sustained progress for that passing game? They got Dayton Howard involved. They got Seth Anderson finally healthy and involved. Do they have more weapons now that they can trust and utilize in that passing game? And what impact does that have? And number 2, can Cade actually have like a decent game on the road? Because, we've talked about his struggles kind of overall, but he's generally been better in Iowa City than on the road. And obviously this weekend's game is in East Lansing, not Iowa City. So he's going to need to, produce, I think, hopefully his best performance of the season, or one of his best performances. Just to see, just to give us, I think, give Iowa fans some confidence that he can produce outside of like idyllic conditions in Iowa City, which we haven't seen a lot so far.
All right.
Yeah. And when you talk about, QB play and how Cade McNamara is going to be successful, my cue or my key for the game is pretty closely related, and it's whether or not the offensive line can have as good of a day as it did against Washington. When you look at the PFF grades, and I made the mistake of mentioning them in front of Kirk Ferentz, and he too has a deep disdain for the PFF grades. No surprise there, because LeVar Woods does as well. And those two agreeing that the experts don't know what they're talking about with their fancy computers. Shocker. I know. But regardless of how valid or not they think those numbers are, the fact is that Iowa's offensive line graded out extremely well against Washington, particularly in the passing game. And Pass Pro has really been at the very least, sort of trailing behind how Iowa has performed in the run game this season. And a lot of that has involved, especially slow starts in the first half when Iowa's getting beat around the edges. And then those halftime adjustments come, they figure out how to sort of close that off. And usually those second halves are often better performances for the offensive line. And so that's why we keep getting guys saying tale of two halves in the, post game and midweek media scrums. That they're doing it just to upset me, and I know because of the eye contact. This has become a thing. But can Iowa's offensive line avoid the first half, second half dichotomy? Right? We don't have to say tale of two blank. We don't have to say that. There's so many other ways to convey that. It's not tale of two. Charles Dickens did not die for this. I'm getting distracted. Anyway, can Iowa's offensive line have a strong first half against this Michigan State defense, set that, sort of bruising tone early, keep McNamara upright early, because that is how they're going to be able to sustain drives in that first half, build themselves out that, base of scoring, so that it's not a second half where it's all right, it's 7-3 Hawkeyes. Let's see if they can hold on, right? They have to sort of build out that lead early and ride that. And then when they have that lead, that's when Tim Lester really starts to get in his bag, call those plays that the defense really doesn't see coming, use a little bit of that creativity. And that's when Iowa really starts rolling. So I think it really starts with a strong 4 quarters from that offensive line. Eliot, how about you?
For me, I go to the defensive side of the ball because it's kind of the same vein of what you just said. 4 quarters, right? Like against Washington, that first, I think it was the first quarter was a little iffy. I know those first few possessions were iffy. Washington and Will Rogers really kind of made it look easy on their first drive where they scored, and that ball was thrown to the corner to Denzel Boston, I think. But yeah, Denzel Boston. And for Iowa to get to a point where they're maybe bending but not breaking again, right? There was a lot of that, but they broke a few times against Michigan State, or excuse me, against Washington. And to play against a team like Michigan State, hopefully this is a point, or if you're an Iowa fan, you're hoping that this is a point where they start to turn that corner and start to look a little bit more like they did last year, where they're dominating from start to finish. And that pass rush doesn't have to adjust, and Aaron Graves doesn't have to go crazy in the second half for them to look good. They just look good from beginning to end. And we mentioned the defensive ends and putting a lot of responsibility in their hands. Man, I just kind of want to see Deontay Craig have a breakout game. We haven't seen that for a while, and he's been playing well. There are games and plays that are made because of a pressure, because of something he did, but I want to see him put it together on the stat sheet. We've seen it from Ethan Hurkett. We've seen it from Max Llewellyn. We've seen it from Brian Allen. I want to see it from Deontay Craig, who was kind of the guy a couple of years ago going into last year, and then things faded a little bit. But I want to see him put it together this weekend. So that's something that I'm watching for as well. And
Yeah.
you know, doesn't hurt to see Brian Allen go a little crazy again with, this has kind of become a Brian Allen stand podcast. I said that on Saturday, but Ross, what were you gonna say?
You mentioned those early drives against Washington. And, one of the big problems Iowa had there was they couldn't get Washington behind schedule on those drives. And the D line wasn't getting home. They weren't getting, that pressure. They weren't forcing, negative plays or incompletes or anything. So yeah, if the pass rush can kind of build on what they did in the second half of that game, or the final 2 quarters, if Adam would prefer that terminology, then yeah, I think if the defense can get Michigan State in some difficult situations, like Childs will become much easier to defend if he has to be a lot more one-dimensional. If he's sitting at 3rd and 9 and he pretty much has to throw the ball downfield versus 3rd and 2 where maybe his legs become a bigger weapon for Michigan State, that's a different approach needed from the defense. So yeah, if Allen and Craig and Graves and Black and Herkett and Llewellyn, if all of them can really do a number on Sparty's front line, that'll help the defense immensely. And I think there's some reason to think that's possible. Sparty has given up, I believe, 15 sacks this year. So not the strongest offensive line in the league by any means.
Calvin Bell and company will probably be licking their chops. We talked about the DBs licking their chops. I mean, I think this could be probably a game where it could be a Maryland 2021 game, right? Like that's what we're looking at. And who was quarterback for them? Taulia Tagovailoa, who was much, I would say, better at that point in time than Aiden Childs is right now. More refined, I guess.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
Maryland
Yeah.
2021,
Yeah,
that's
he
your
just more experience.
Yeah, as I say, that's your best case scenario, I would say, for this game. But it's not out of the question for sure.
It's just our frame of reference for a really good game. How's that?
That works.
It could. I'm just saying it could be. Maybe
Yeah.
it gets to that point because if you're able to put that type of pressure and just throw up the ball, and like we saw what Jamari Harris has done and did earlier in the season. He's got the only defensive touchdown for Iowa. I put it on Twitter after he had that pick against Washington. He looked like a punt returner on that. So who's to say he doesn't get, a couple more of those as the season goes along? And TJ Hall played well in the second half in lieu of Deshaun Lee being taken out of the game. He got beat on a crosser, and I imagine Phil Parker had a few things to say, and then TJ Hall went out there. I think if there's a game to really force some turnovers and get those numbers up, it's this Saturday.
And Jamari thinks that he should have scored on that Washington pick as well. And, that would have been an 86-yard pick six. It would have made a lot of highlight reels, but he was a stone-faced, like, I should have scored, had that. Like he was thinking six all the way. And this looks like a game where I'm not going to be so bold as to call a pick six for a certain player or anything like that. But it's not a pick six warning. It's a pick six watch. The conditions are favorable for Jamari Harris to score a touchdown in this game. Stay tuned to your local meteorologist to see if this turns into a pick six warning. But, the conditions are there. This is a good opportunity for him to play some aggressive play at cornerback, and for Phil Parker to be aggressive with his play calls too, because they are acutely attuned to these, sort of situational tendencies that certain teams have. And the more inexperienced a QB, generally speaking, the more pronounced these situational tendencies become. And, Eliot, what did Kirk say when I asked him about those big plays the defense made against Washington and then those 4th down stops? He said, once the score started to get away from them, we knew that they were going to be pretty much abandoning the run. We knew that they were going to be pass heavy, and we could be more aggressive with our play calls from there. So they know what's up. They know how to read situationally how a game's unfolding, and they know how to adjust their defensive play calling on top of that. I think we are going to see some high aggression from Phil Parker as he calls plays against his alma mater on Saturday.
Just on the topic of Harris's runbacks, that especially that long one that didn't quite end up in a touchdown, but really reminded me of Desmond King when he was returning interceptions and
Yeah.
returning punts at Iowa. Like there's a very similar ability at play there. So, and Desmond had a lot of success running punts and interceptions back. So,
Alrighty. Currently, the Hawkeyes are favored by 5.5. It opened at 6.5 and has now dropped to 5.5 with a total of 40.5. And according to ESPN, Iowa has roughly a 71% chance to win. So, guys, who wins? By how much? Why? Ross, I'll go to you here first.
be on the spot. All right.
No pressure.
What's that?
I said no pressure.
No pressure. I am taking Iowa. I am going Hawkeyes 31-10, which feels a little aggressive, but I also feel like this is a game where, like we've talked about so far, I think this could be a really good game for the defense to get things rolling, and it feels like a game where things could really snowball. We saw that against Washington last week, and especially with a very young, inexperienced quarterback, and this Iowa defense, mistakes can compound and really come fast and furious. And for that reason, I think there is going to be a defensive score. I think Caleb Johnson's going to have another good game. I talked about in my article that he's facing some tougher run defenses coming up in the back half of the season. That doesn't quite start this week. Sparty doesn't have the toughest run defense. So I think he's going to have a good game. Cade's going to have a pretty good game. And yeah, I think Iowa is going to win this one pretty comfortably.
Ross, you basically took the words out of my mouth. And because, I'm thinking Iowa 27-9, which is substantially ahead of a 5.5 point spread. But again, this feels like a game where mistakes can compound. A game can start to snowball. It can start to get away from Sparty because all those conditions are there for sort of an error-filled day on offense for them, right? A big play day for the defense again. And, there is absolutely some reason to worry that if you believe in trap games, this might be one of them after Iowa, put together such a complete performance, but against Washington. But every time we talk to the players, most of them said, yeah, we're not really satisfied with how we played. And there are a lot of people saying, best game of the season, right? And they're like, that was not a, pat ourselves on the back, rest on our laurels game for the players that we talked to. And I think a big part of that is the fact that, the Huskies outgained Iowa by 65 yards. So there was a lot that they have to clean up. And I don't think that they are going to be in the mindset, especially because there isn't a big game coming up next week. They've got Northwestern the week after this, and you don't skip past teams on your schedule because you're focusing on Northwestern. You just, and that's not shade against Northwestern. It's just, they're not a top 10 team. They're not even a top 10 team in the Big Ten at this point. So I don't think Iowa's focus is where it shouldn't be. And I think they are capable of, Ross, like you said, really starting to lean and push on Sparty and turning what will probably be a close game at half into a no-doubter by the middle of the fourth quarter, if not earlier in the process. So I'm saying 27-9 Iowa. Eliot, how about you?
I think we're all pretty much in the same boat. I'm at 34-13. I'm expecting something like Iowa's just going to handle them, and then we see like a garbage time touchdown. This is, to me, where this is at is a spot where Iowa isn't satisfied. But for those of us who have played competitive sports, whether it's, maybe even running, whether it's basketball, whether it's football, baseball, when your team is hot. When your team is rolling. And the start of it appears to be this Washington game. Like, it was as if they could do no wrong in that game. And to me, this looks like the start of a streak. And to where Iowa really gets moving. And Kirk Ferentz is just good at that, right? Like, you win a game, you lose a game, you're just on to the next one. 24-hour rule, right? So this is a scenario where I really think Iowa just keeps the ball rolling. And what did you say, Ross? Snowball? This really snowball into a big. I mean, we barely talked about Caleb Johnson, right? This is just. I really think this is going to be a big game for him, and it's just going to open things up for Cade like it did this last week. So just looks like a blowout victory to me. But don't overlook Sparty, right? I mean, we praised Aiden Childs, we praised Jonathan Smith, who resurrected freaking Oregon State. Like they've got good pieces in East Lansing. It's just looking like too much for to be in Iowa's favor at this point in time. So taking the Hawkeyes 34. What did I say? 34-13? Yeah.
Yeah. I think Michigan State's long term looks pretty good with Jonathan Smith as their head coach and Childs as the quarterback, but long term isn't Saturday. So I think Saturday looks like a tough night for Sparty.
Yeah, and Eliot, like you mentioned, Kirk Ferentz's real, like his hidden superpower is keeping Iowa motivated, keeping them focused, and keeping them playing at their level for all 12 weeks. You know, they have not had a losing record in the back half of the schedule in the last 6 games of the 12-game regular season since that disastrous 2014 year. That's how long it's been since they have been under 500, and usually they have a winning record in those 6 games under Kirk Ferentz since then. Usually it's 4-2, 5-1, and you look at what is in front of them in this slate. I would be shocked if this is not at least 4 more wins and probably more, because this is just what Iowa's built for. They are a nightmare in November, and it looks like November might be coming a little bit early in East Lansing this week.
All righty, folks, we will wrap it up there. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode of HawkCast. Don't forget, if you're listening, you might not have subscribed, so hit that button so you don't miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment, let us know what you're thinking. Final score. Do you feel the same way we do? Because it really feels like the Hawkeyes are starting to roll. They're figuring things out on offense, and it looks like they're moving ahead, chugging along, and it could result in a victory again in East Lansing this weekend. Same deal for Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You might be listening but not subscribed, so do that so you don't miss an episode. Leave that rate and review. It does help us out a lot. Seriously, guys. Like if you would do that, we greatly appreciate it. So do that today. Again, tons of insight, tons of intel at iowa.rivals.com for our premium subscribers. If you're not a subscriber, you can do that today. Just head to the description of this show. That link is right there. It's everywhere. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Just click that, sign up today. You might have to copy and paste it, but it's there for you. So join us today. We'd love to have you on the premium boards and getting all the intel that we get because we relay it to you. So my name is Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. For now, we will see you next time.